Every year, tens of thousands of cargo ships sail through pirate-infested waters, carrying 90% of the world's trade. But here's the question. If pirates have guns, why don't cargo ships fight back with guns of their own? In this video, we'll uncover the real methods ships use to survive: razor wire, high-pressure water cannons, LRAD sound cannons, laser dazzlers, hidden citadels, and even naval escorts. We'll also reveal why international law, insurance rules, and human safety mean merchant ships almost never carry weapons, and why non-lethal defenses have proven more effective than firepower in stopping Somali pirates and others around the world. Most people imagine that cargo ships are floating fortresses, massive steel giants that can shrug off almost anything. So it comes as a surprise when they learn that most merchant vessels, the very ships carrying 90% of the world's goods, sail completely unarmed. Not a single rifle on board. When pirates approach, the crew isn't grabbing machine guns to fight them off. Instead, they're relying on systems, tactics, and naval support. But why is that? Why would billion-dollar ships carrying millions in cargo sail without weapons, even through some of the most dangerous waters on Earth? The answer lies in international law, practicality, and risk. Let's start with the law. A ship doesn't belong to a single country. It belongs to its flag state. And as it sails from port to port, it enters dozens of different jurisdictions. If a ship carried firearms, every port would treat it like a weapons shipment. The bureaucracy alone would be a nightmare. Permits, customs declarations, inspections, seizures. Some countries outright ban foreign vessels from entering with weapons on board. Therefore, if a ship armed itself, it could easily be denied entry into ports, resulting in delays that cost millions. In short, weapons make ships less welcome around the world, not more secure. But even if the legal part could be solved, there's the human factor. Merchant sailors aren't soldiers. They're trained to operate engines, navigate storms, and handle cargo, not to fire weapons under stress. Pirates who target ships often come equipped with AK-47s, sometimes even RPGs. Against that, a poorly trained sailor with a handgun or shotgun would not only be outgunned, but could also escalate the situation. Pirates don't always start shooting. Many attacks begin with intimidation, fast boats circling, shouting through loudspeakers, and warning shots in the air. If the crew responded with gunfire, pirates would have every reason to unleash their full firepower. Instead of protecting the crew, weapons could provoke a massacre. There's also the problem of security on board. Imagine a ship with 25 crew members from diverse nationalities, cultures, and backgrounds. Introducing firearms into that environment creates the possibility of theft, misuse, or accidents. And what happens when the ship is docked in a busy port and dozens of contractors, inspectors, and stevedores come on board? Suddenly, unsecured weapons are floating around in an environment that was never designed to store them safely. Unlike warships, merchant ships don't have armories with guards and protocols. Guns would be more of a liability than an asset. Shipping companies are acutely aware of these risks. Insurance providers, too, play a huge role. If an insurance company believes that a ship is increasing its risk by carrying firearms, premiums will skyrocket. Ironically, arming a vessel could make it more expensive to insure than simply relying on passive defenses and naval protection. And since shipping is a razor-thin margin industry where costs are everything, companies generally prefer solutions that reduce legal and financial risk rather than create new ones. Still, people often ask, isn't it irresponsible to send unarmed ships into pirate-infested waters like the Gulf of Aden or the Strait of Malacca? The answer is more complicated than it seems. The reality is that ships don't travel alone. High-risk areas are monitored constantly by naval coalitions. NATO, the European Union, the Indian Navy, the US Navy, and many others. These navies patrol the most dangerous corridors, providing a kind of umbrella protection. Merchant ships also stick to recommended transit lanes, where help can reach them more quickly. So instead of relying on weapons on board, the global system is built around coordination, surveillance, and fast response. There's also the strategy of delay. Anti-piracy systems on ships aren't designed to defeat pirates in battle. They're designed to slow them down, make boarding as hard as possible, and buy time until naval forces can arrive. Guns don't fit this model. They're an immediate escalation tool, not a delaying tactic. Non-lethal systems like water cannons, razor wire, and sound cannons all work to keep pirates off the deck without triggering a firefight. Once pirates fail to board quickly, their chances drop dramatically because reinforcements could already be on the way. Now, some might argue, what about private armed security teams? Isn't that basically the same as having guns on board? The distinction is crucial. Private security contractors are usually hired temporarily. They embark at specific ports, travel with the ship through dangerous waters, and then disembark at the next safe port. The weapons travel with them, rather than staying on the ship permanently. This solves many of the legal and logistical issues. These teams are also trained professionals, often ex-military, who know how to handle weapons and follow strict rules of engagement. They aren't the ship's crew, they're specialists brought in for a limited time. That's very different from arming the ship itself. And it's worth noting, even private armed security is controversial. Some countries still don't allow armed guards in their waters. In some cases, ships with private security have been detained for violating local laws. So while it's an option, it's far from a universal solution. The safest bet for most companies is to stick with non-lethal defenses, comply with international regulations, and rely on navies when things go wrong. At the heart of it, this isn't about being weak or unprepared. It's about managing risk in the most practical way. Guns sound like a simple solution, but they create more problems than they solve. The real strength of merchant ships lies in their ability to endure, to make boarding so frustrating and difficult that pirates give up. And once you understand this logic, the rest of the anti-piracy measures, barriers, sound weapons, and safe rooms make much more sense. They're all built on the idea of slowing down the attackers, not killing them. Because in the open sea, time is the most valuable defense of all. When you imagine a pirate attack, you probably picture fast boats with armed men rushing toward the side of a giant ship, ladders, and grappling hooks ready. And you'd be right. That's how most boarding attempts begin. Pirates don't try to sink a cargo ship. They want to get on board, overwhelm the crew, and take control of the bridge. That's when the real money is made, either by stealing cargo or demanding ransom for the crew. So the number one job of any cargo ship in pirate waters is simple: don't let anyone on deck. And surprisingly, the defenses that make this possible are often as low-tech as they are effective. Start with the razor wire. You might think of it as something used on prison fences or military bases, but it's one of the cheapest and most widely used anti-piracy tools at sea. Shipping crews stretch long coils of razor wire around the edges of the vessel, especially near the ladders and access points pirates would normally target. When a small skiff races alongside a massive tanker, the pirate's goal is to hook a ladder or grappling line onto the railing and climb. Razor wire makes this process extremely difficult and dangerous. It's slippery, sharp, and nearly impossible to handle while balancing on a swaying boat. Even if pirates try to cut through it, the process takes time, and time is exactly what the defenders want to buy. But razor wire is just the beginning. Many ships install steel plates or welded barriers over vulnerable areas. Think of doors, stairways, and hatches. Anything that would normally be a quick access route gets blocked or reinforced. Pirates rely on speed. The faster they can climb and break in, the greater their chances. Every extra barrier slows them down, makes them louder, and increases the odds that naval patrols can intervene. In fact, reports from the Gulf of Aden show that most failed pirate attacks ended simply because the boarding process took too long. Pirates ran out of fuel, patience, or nerve. And then there's the water. Fire hoses have always been part of a ship's equipment, but when piracy surged in the early 2000s, they were turned into weapons. A fire hose under full pressure is powerful enough to knock a man off balance. Aim it from a high deck at a small boat below, and it becomes nearly impossible for attackers to climb up. Some ships now have permanent high-pressure water cannons installed, which can blast intruders with thousands of liters per minute. The streams can even sink a small wooden skiff if aimed properly. It sounds almost comic, pirates with rifles being chased off by hoses. But in practice, water is one of the most effective deterrents ever used. Another clever trick is the anti-boarding trailing wire system. Picture thick steel cables, dozens of them, dragging in the water behind a moving ship. If a pirate skiff tries to come close from behind, the wires tangle in its propellers, stalling or capsizing it. For attackers traveling in small, fast boats, this can be catastrophic. The trailing wires don't require constant attention. They just hang in the water like a defensive curtain. Some systems are even designed to be reeled in and redeployed depending on the ship's situation. For the crew, it's a simple, low-cost way to keep predators at bay. The defenses aren't only about hardware. Sometimes they're about illusion. Crews have been known to place dummies on deck figures dressed like sailors, standing in strategic positions, to make it look like the ship has extra lookouts or even armed guards. From a distance, in rough seas, a pirate approaching at high speed can't easily tell the difference. The presence of visible guards, even fake ones, forces attackers to reconsider whether they're approaching an easy target or a well-defended one. And it's worth noting that none of these defenses are meant to be perfect shields. A determined group of pirates with the right equipment can still attempt to board. But that's not the point. The point is to slow them down, exhaust their resources, and make the operation too risky. Piracy is, at its core, a business. If the risk of failure is too high, pirates move on to the next target. A ship lined with razor wire, spraying torrents of water, dragging steel cables, and broadcasting the appearance of guards is simply too much trouble compared to an undefended vessel a few miles away. Real incidents back this up. In 2011, the MV Almazan, a cargo ship in the Indian Ocean, was targeted by Somali pirates. The crew deployed hoses and barricades while sending distress signals. The pirates circled, attempted to approach, but couldn't board. After several minutes of failed attempts, they gave up and retreated. No shots were fired. The crew wasn't armed. The only tools they used were barriers and water. And that story isn't unusual. Dozens of similar incidents are logged each year, most ending without casualties, thanks to these physical defenses. There's also the psychological factor. Imagine being a pirate in a small skiff, bouncing across waves, engines straining, fuel running low, bullets wet from sea spray, and suddenly being blasted by water powerful enough to knock you flat. Even hardened attackers don't want to risk injury or drowning for a job that is already getting messy. The defenses work not just physically but mentally, undermining the confidence of attackers who rely on speed and intimidation. Some modern ships take it a step further, integrating these defenses into automated systems. Sensors on deck can detect approaching vessels, triggering floodlights, sirens, and water jets. The idea is to overwhelm the attackers before they even touch the hull. These setups aren't common on every vessel. They're expensive, after all, But in high-risk regions, companies see them as worthwhile investments. What ties all these methods together is their simplicity. Razor wire, water hoses, steel plates, cables, none of these are futuristic weapons. They're adaptations of everyday maritime tools, repurposed into layers of defense. And that's important because merchant shipping is about practicality. A system that is too complex or requires constant maintenance won't survive long on a vessel crewed by a handful of sailors. But a roll of wire, a hose, or a steel barrier, that's manageable, that's reliable. And the beauty of these systems is that they don't escalate the situation. A pirate who gets sprayed with water isn't likely to retaliate by shooting indiscriminately because he hasn't been attacked with deadly force. The confrontation remains one-sided, defensive, not offensive. This reduces the risk of casualties and keeps the ship's crew alive, which is always the highest priority. Cargo can be replaced. Human lives cannot. If razor wire and water cannons sound a little old-fashioned, the next layer of ship defense feels like something straight out of science fiction. Over the last 2 decades, as piracy surged off Somalia and across the Indian Ocean, new technologies emerged that could stop pirates not with bullets or brute force, but with sound and light. These systems were designed to attack the senses, overwhelming pirates before they could even think about boarding. They don't destroy boats, they don't cause permanent injuries, but they can turn a pirate attack into a chaotic retreat in minutes. The most famous of these is called the LRAD, the Long-Range Acoustic Device. If you've never heard one, you're lucky. Imagine a sound so sharp, so piercing, that it feels less like listening and more like being stabbed in the ears. The LRAD projects a focused beam of sound, reaching over 150 decibels at close range. For comparison, a jet engine at takeoff is about 120. At full power, the LRAD is not just loud, it's unbearable. Pirates who've tried to approach ships equipped with one often find themselves clutching their heads, disoriented, unable to concentrate or coordinate. Communication between attackers breaks down instantly, and in a small boat, bouncing on waves or balance and timing are everything. Losing focus for even a few seconds can end the attack. What makes the LRAD so effective is its precision. It doesn't blast sound in all directions like a speaker at a concert. Instead, it creates a narrow cone of intense sound that can be aimed like a spotlight. This means a ship's crew can target approaching skiffs without deafening themselves in the process. The crew can even broadcast verbal warnings over long distances, telling pirates to stay away before switching to the pain mode if they ignore the message. It's a deterrent that escalates step by step, giving attackers the chance to back off before things get truly unpleasant. The LRAD's debut in the maritime world came in 2005, when the cruise ship Seaborne Spirit was attacked by pirates off the Somali coast. The attackers fired rifles and even an RPG, trying to disable the luxury liner. But the ship's crew deployed an LRAD, blasting the approaching skiffs with an ear-splitting beam of sound. The pirates couldn't handle it. Disoriented, they turned away, abandoning the chase. No passengers were harmed, and the incident became one of the first public examples of non-lethal acoustic weapons saving a vessel at sea. Since then, LRADs have spread across fleets worldwide, becoming a standard piece of kit in many high-risk zones. But sound isn't the only sense that can be exploited. Light is another powerful weapon in the arsenal of non-lethal defenses. At night, pirates rely on the cover of darkness. A fast boat with no lights can approach silently, closing the distance before the crew even notices. To counter this, many ships use high-powered searchlights and flood lamps that can instantly turn night into day. The sudden glare exposes attackers, making it impossible for them to hide. And when you're sitting in an open skiff with nowhere to duck, that kind of exposure is dangerous. The surprise is gone, and pirates know it. Some systems go further, using laser dazzlers, handheld or mounted devices that project a concentrated green beam. These lasers don't burn or cut, but they can temporarily blind or disorient anyone who looks directly at them. For pirates trying to aim weapons or steer toward the hull of a ship, that's devastating. A flash of green light across the eyes, and suddenly, the horizon is a blur. The ocean is already a disorienting environment, with rolling waves and shifting shadows. Adding visual disruption on top of that makes boarding nearly impossible. There are even simpler tricks that exploit vision. Some ships mount strobe lights that flash in irregular, high-frequency bursts. The effect is dizzying, especially at night, where flashing light against a dark sea can cause nausea or vertigo. The human brain struggles to process the staccato signals, and attackers lose their sense of orientation. Again, no bullets are fired, but the pirates are forced to retreat. Of course, none of these tools is a magic wand. Pirates adapt. Reports exist of attackers wearing noise-canceling headphones or ear protection to counter LRADs, though the effectiveness of these countermeasures is debated. Floodlights can be avoided by approaching from different angles. Lasers are controversial, too, since they raise ethical questions about the risk of permanent eye damage. Maritime security experts argue that while dazzlers are marketed as non-lethal, misuse could lead to serious injuries. Still, compared to an exchange of gunfire, these risks are considered far more acceptable. The real power of sonic and visual weapons isn't in defeating pirates outright, it's in breaking their confidence. Piracy depends on surprise and intimidation. A small group of men in a skiff, armed with rifles, looks terrifying when you're a crew of unarmed sailors. But when those same men are clutching their ears, staggering from noise, blinded by lights, unable to hear each other or even see where they're going, the illusion of power collapses. Suddenly, it's not the pirates in control, it's the crew, even without guns. And there's another important detail. These weapons create evidence. LRADs, for example, often have built-in recording functions that log warnings broadcast to approaching vessels. If an incident escalates, the crew can prove they tried to deter the attackers without resorting to lethal force. This legal trail is invaluable in the complex world of international shipping, where companies must justify every action to insurers, courts, and governments. Non-lethal systems not only protect the ship, but also protect the reputation and legal standing of the company that owns it. The combination of sound and light may seem strange, but it taps into something fundamental. Humans are vulnerable when their senses are overloaded. We rely on hearing and sight to make sense of the world, especially in stressful environments. Disrupt those senses, and even the bravest attackers hesitate. At sea, hesitation is deadly. A moment's pause can mean losing balance, capsizing a skiff, or simply realizing the target isn't worth the trouble. That's why shipping companies continue to invest in these technologies despite their costs. An LRAD can cost tens of thousands of dollars, but compared to the loss of a cargo ship worth hundreds of millions, it's nothing. For many operators, the math is simple. Invest in deterrence now, avoid ransom later. And so, alongside the old-school defenses like razor wire and hoses, you'll find futuristic sound cannons and blinding lasers quietly standing guard on the decks of modern cargo ships. Taken together, they create a layered defense system. The pirates never know exactly what they'll face when they approach. Maybe it's wire tearing at their hands. Maybe it's water knocking them off balance. Or maybe it's a deafening sound that makes them drop their weapons and turn back. That uncertainty is the real weapon. The knowledge that boarding won't be quick, won't be easy, and might not even be possible. And in the world of piracy, where every second counts, that knowledge alone is often enough to send attackers searching for an easier target somewhere else. When you look at a cargo ship from afar, it doesn't seem like the kind of vessel that could escape anything. These ships are enormous, sometimes longer than the height of the Empire State Building, moving with the kind of slow, steady momentum that feels unstoppable but not exactly nimble. So it might surprise you to learn that one of the most effective defenses against pirates is simply running away. Not in the sense of cowardice, but in the sense of raw physics. Because when a modern container ship opens up its engines, it can move faster than most pirate boats can handle. Pirates don't use warships. They rely on small, fast skiffs, open boats with outboard motors, usually designed for fishing or short-distance transport. To catch a cargo ship, they load these boats with as much fuel as they can carry, mount a few ladders, and bring weapons for intimidation. In calm waters and close range, these skiffs can reach impressive speeds, sometimes over 30 knots. On paper, that's faster than most cargo ships. But here's the trick: those speeds don't last. A skiff burns through fuel at a staggering rate. Add waves, currents, and the heavy weight of armed men, and suddenly those 30 knots shrink dramatically. The pirates' real window of advantage is short. They have to close in quickly, or the opportunity slips away. Cargo ships, on the other hand, are built for endurance. Many tankers and container ships cruise at 14 to 17 knots during normal operations to conserve fuel. But when they need to, they can push 20 knots or more. That might not sound fast compared to a car, but at sea, it's huge. 20 knots is often the breaking point. Above that, most pirate skiffs can't keep up for long without overheating or running out of fuel. Captains know this, and when an attack is spotted, one of the first orders is almost always to accelerate. The ship may burn more fuel, but it buys time and distance. And speed isn't the only trick. These ships can't turn on a dime like a speedboat, but they can use their sheer size to their advantage. When a captain orders evasive maneuvers, the ship may begin zigzagging across the water, creating massive wakes in its trail. For a small skiff, those rolling waves are like walls of water. Engines struggle, balance is lost, and attackers risk capsizing if they misjudge the timing. Even if they stay upright, the turbulence makes it nearly impossible to pull alongside long enough to board. Think of it like trying to climb onto a moving truck while someone swerves left and right. That's what pirates face when a cargo ship starts weaving at full speed. There are dramatic examples of this playing out. In 2011, the bulk carrier MV African Eagle was attacked in the Arabian Sea by two pirate skiffs. The crew spotted them early on radar and immediately increased speed, steering in a zigzag pattern to throw off their approach. The pirates tried for nearly 45 minutes to get close, but the ship's wake kept swamping their boats. Finally, low on fuel, they gave up. The African Eagle sailed on unharmed, without a single shot fired. It was a battle won with nothing more than engine power and good seamanship. For the crew, these maneuvers are not improvised. Merchant sailors train for them. During anti-piracy drills, crews practice increasing speed, changing headings, and coordinating lookout posts. The bridge team works together to keep pirates from finding an angle of attack. They know that hesitation can be costly. If pirates latch a ladder onto the railing, the fight changes completely. The best way to win is to never let them get that close. There's also a psychological element here. Pirates often rely on shock and speed, racing up to a ship and firing into the air to terrify the crew into submission. But if the ship responds by surging forward, turning aggressively, and throwing up huge waves, that psychological advantage fades. Suddenly, the pirates are the ones on the defensive, fighting the sea itself just to stay upright. It's a reminder that size can be its own weapon. A container ship displaces tens of thousands of tons of water. A skiff displaces maybe a few hundred kilograms. In a clash between the two, the ocean is always on the side of the bigger vessel. Of course, this doesn't mean cargo ships are invincible. Not every vessel can hit 20 knots. Some tankers, especially when fully loaded, can only manage 13 or 14. In those cases, evasive maneuvers alone might not be enough. Pirates can exploit this by coordinating multiple skiffs, approaching from different angles to cut off escape. But even then, a moving target is harder to board than a stationary one. Every extra knot of speed is another layer of defense. The element of timing is critical. Most pirate attacks happen in the early morning hours, when visibility is poor and crews are tired. Spotting the skiffs early is the difference between being boarded and staying free. That's why ships place extra lookouts during high-risk transits, scanning the horizon constantly. Once attackers are detected, every second matters. The engines roar, the course changes, and the battle begins not with gunfire, but with motion. Even if pirates manage to get close, the maneuvering doesn't stop. Captains will sometimes swing the stern toward an approaching skiff, using the ship's massive propeller wash to create violent turbulence. For a small boat, getting caught in that wash can mean swamping or even capsizing. Pirates know this, which is why many prefer to approach from the sides. But even there, the high freeboard of most ships, the sheer height from waterline to deck, makes boarding extremely difficult when the vessel is moving at speed. Climbing a rope ladder on a stable dock is one thing. Clinging to it while being slammed by waves from a churning propeller is another. Some ships are even designed with evasive defense in mind. Newer hull shapes create larger wakes at higher speeds, adding to the difficulty of pursuit. Others have reinforced rudders and steering systems that allow for sharper course changes in emergencies. These aren't weapons in the traditional sense, but they turn the ship itself into a tool of defense. The vessel becomes not just a target, but a moving fortress, shaking off attackers through sheer momentum. And here's something many people overlook. Pirates are not suicidal. They don't want to die at sea. They want a quick, profitable capture. Every minute they spend chasing a ship at high speed increases the chance of mechanical failure, fuel loss, or intervention by naval patrols. When a ship refuses to slow down and instead fights with speed and maneuvering, the calculation changes. What looked like an easy payday suddenly looks like a money-losing risk. And in the end, piracy is about profit. If the profit disappears, so does the motivation to keep chasing. So while it may look like a lumbering giant, a cargo ship on the run is anything but helpless. Its engines, its hull, and its wake are as much a part of its defense as any razor wire or sound cannon. In the open sea, movement is power, and when pirates come calling, sometimes the smartest move is simply to move faster, harder, and longer than they can. If everything else fails, if the razor wire has been cut, the hose is silenced, the LRAD ignored, and the evasive maneuvers outlasted, then the crew of a cargo ship has one final card to play. It isn't glamorous. It doesn't look heroic, but it has saved countless lives. It's called the Citadel, and in the language of modern shipping, it means one thing: a safe room, a fortified space inside the ship where the entire crew can retreat and wait. Not to fight, not to bargain, but to survive. The concept is simple. Pirates don't want ships. They want control. They want leverage over the company that owns the vessel, and that leverage comes in the form of human lives. A ransom isn't worth much if the crew is gone, so the Citadel denies them exactly that. It's a space deep inside the ship, reinforced with steel doors, stocked with food, water, medical supplies, and, most importantly, communications equipment. If pirates manage to board and swarm the deck, the crew slips away, locks themselves inside, and becomes untouchable. From there, they can radio naval forces, activate emergency beacons, and wait until help arrives. Design varies from ship to ship. On some vessels, the Citadel is as small as a reinforced engine control room. On others, it's a purpose-built chamber big enough for the entire crew, complete with beds, toilets, and backup air filtration. The goal isn't comfort, it's endurance. The crew might need to stay inside for hours or even days, depending on how quickly rescue forces can respond. So every detail matters. Ventilation that pirates can't cut off, locks they can't break, cameras to monitor the ship's status. It's not a panic room in the Hollywood sense, but it plays the same role, buying time until outside forces tilt the balance. The most famous example of a Citadel saving a crew came in 2011 with the MV Monte Cristo, an Italian cargo ship hijacked by Somali pirates in the Indian Ocean. As the pirates boarded, the crew of 23 men retreated into the Citadel, sealing themselves inside. For more than 24 hours, the pirates tried to break in, searching the ship and attempting to force the doors. They failed. With the crew secure, a British Royal Navy ship intercepted and stormed the Monte Cristo. The pirates surrendered without a fight. No shots were fired at the crew, no lives were lost, and the Citadel proved its worth. Stories like that are why insurance companies and shipping firms now insist that vessels transiting high-risk areas have citadels as standard. For the crew, the knowledge that a safe fallback exists changes everything. Instead of panicking when attackers approach, they know there's a plan, a structure, a last line of defense that can keep them alive. But the Citadel isn't just about steel walls and locks. It's about communication. Pirates can board and smash radios on the bridge, but if the crew is hidden away with a secondary system, they can still send distress signals. In many cases, the Citadel is wired directly to satellite phones and secure beacons, bypassing the ship's main controls. That means even when pirates think they've taken over, the world already knows. Naval task forces in the region can triangulate the distress call, dispatching helicopters, frigates, or special forces teams to intercept. The crew might be trapped, but they're not forgotten. From the pirates' perspective, this is a nightmare. They've risked fuel, weapons, and men to capture a ship, only to find it's an empty shell. No hostages, no bargaining power, just locked doors and silence. The cargo might be valuable, but fencing 1,000 containers of bulk goods is nearly impossible compared to negotiating a ransom. Without the crew, their leverage disappears. In many cases, frustrated pirates abandon the ship entirely once they realize the crew is locked in a citadel. They don't have the time or the tools to break in, and every minute spent trying raises the chance of a naval intervention. Of course, the Citadel strategy isn't perfect. There have been cases where pirates managed to breach the room, either by using cutting tools or sheer persistence. In other incidents, crews hesitated, unsure whether to retreat too early or too late, leading to partial captures where some members were caught outside. Training is critical. Drills must be precise. When the alarm sounds, every sailor knows exactly where to go, what to grab, and how to seal the citadel. Any confusion can be fatal. There's also the question of morale. Living for hours in a sealed steel room, listening to the thuds and shouts of armed men searching the ship above, is a psychological ordeal. Crews describe the silence, the heat, the fear that the next sound will be the door giving way. Yet again and again, they endure, and when rescue comes, the relief is overwhelming. The Citadel doesn't just save bodies, it saves the hope of survival. And there's another layer that few people outside the industry think about: cost. Building a proper citadel into a ship isn't cheap. It takes up space that could otherwise carry cargo, and retrofitting older vessels requires serious engineering. But compared to the millions that a single hijacking can cost in ransom, legal fees, and lost time, it's an investment companies are more than willing to make. Some insurers even reduce premiums for ships with certified citadels, acknowledging their effectiveness. One of the most telling signs of their success is how pirates have adapted. In the early 2000s, most attacks involved boarding and immediately trying to intimidate the crew into surrendering. Today, knowing that many ships have citadels, pirates sometimes abandon vessels faster, unwilling to waste time on what could be a futile effort. That adaptation alone proves the point. The presence of a citadel changes the game, even before it's ever used. What's remarkable about this last line of defense is how it fits into the broader philosophy of anti-piracy measures. Cargo ships don't fight back like warships. They don't try to sink enemies or trade fire. Their entire strategy is built on one principle: deny the pirates what they need. Deny them speed, deny them boarding, deny them control, and finally, if all else fails, deny them the crew itself. The Citadel is the ultimate denial, the final no, in a chain of defenses that prioritizes survival over combat. And in a world where piracy still lingers, though less visible than a decade ago, that philosophy has proven itself time and time again. No guns, no violence, just steel doors, careful planning, and the patience to wait until help arrives. It's not a Hollywood ending, but for the men and women aboard these ships, it's the one that matters most. Because at the end of the day, the Citadel isn't about beating pirates. It's about outlasting them. For all the talk of razor wire, water cannons, and safe rooms, there's one reality about piracy that can be ignored. Cargo ships are not warships. They are floating containers of steel and fuel, designed to haul goods, not fight battles. And no matter how many clever defenses crews deploy, sometimes the threat is simply too great. That's where the broader world steps in. Because piracy doesn't just threaten one ship or one company, it threatens the arteries of global trade. And when those arteries are at risk, nations act. The most famous example came in the late 2000s, when Somali piracy was at its peak. Attacks in the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean skyrocketed, with hundreds of ships targeted each year. Ransoms worth tens of millions of dollars were being paid. Insurance rates were soaring, and shipping companies were rerouting vessels thousands of miles around Africa to avoid the danger. The situation was so severe that governments could no longer ignore it. The seas had become a battlefield not just for sailors, but for economies. The response was Operation Atlanta, launched by the European Union in 2008. It was the first ever EU naval mission, and its mandate was clear: protect ships delivering humanitarian aid to Somalia, deter and disrupt piracy, and support other international efforts in the region. Soon, warships from countries across Europe were patrolling the high-risk corridor, their radars sweeping for suspicious skiffs, their helicopters ready to launch at a moment's notice. For merchant sailors, the sight of a gray hull on the horizon suddenly meant hope. They weren't alone anymore. And Europe wasn't the only player. NATO launched its own mission, Operation Ocean Shield, while the United States, China, India, Japan, Russia, and dozens of other nations deployed ships independently. At the peak of the crisis, the waters off Somalia became one of the most heavily patrolled maritime regions in the world. Frigates, destroyers, patrol aircraft, and even unmanned drones all played a part in the hunt. It was a rare moment of unity. Countries that often disagreed on land found common cause at sea, because piracy hurt everyone equally. The impact was dramatic. Naval escorts began organizing convoys, where multiple merchant vessels would travel together through dangerous zones under the watch of warships. It was a throwback to the days of World War II, when convoys protected by destroyers carried vital supplies across submarine-infested waters. The principle was the same: safety in numbers, with the added deterrence of armed escorts ready to strike if pirates attacked. For crews, joining a convoy meant delays and tight schedules, but it also meant survival. But it wasn't just about brute force. Intelligence sharing became a crucial weapon. Maritime security centers were set up, where shipping companies could report suspicious activity in real time. Satellites tracked movements along the Somali coast. Naval forces monitored pirate strongholds, spotting skiffs before they even left shore. Information flowed between militaries, insurers, and private security firms, creating a network that made the oceans less of a lawless expanse and more of a monitored grid. Still, naval patrols had their limits. The Indian Ocean is vast, millions of square miles of open water. A handful of warships, even a few dozen, can't be everywhere at once. Pirates knew this, and they adapted by striking further offshore, using mother ships, larger vessels that carried smaller skiffs hundreds of miles into the ocean before launching attacks. This forced navies to stretch their resources even thinner. It became a cat-and-mouse game, patrols chasing shadows, pirates testing the edges of coverage. Yet the presence of navies mattered, even when they couldn't respond instantly. Pirates are businessmen, not martyrs. They calculate risk, and the risk of running into a helicopter gunship or a boarding team of commandos was often enough to dissuade them. By 2012, the number of successful hijackings had plummeted. The sight of warships, the buzz of rotor blades, the knowledge that an invisible net of surveillance exists, all of it chipped away at the pirate economy until it was no longer sustainable at scale. There were dramatic rescues, too. In 2012, U.S. Navy SEALs freed 2 hostages held by Somali pirates in a daring nighttime raid. In another case, South Korean commandos stormed the chemical tanker Samho Jewelry, killing several pirates and rescuing the crew. These operations sent a clear message: the world was no longer willing to tolerate lawlessness at sea. For every high-profile raid that made the news, dozens of smaller interventions played out quietly. Pirates intercepted, skiffs destroyed, crews protected. But perhaps the most remarkable part of this cooperation is how it brought rivals together. Chinese and American warships, often at odds geopolitically, coordinated escorts. Russian and European frigates shared information. Japanese and Indian navies patrolled side by side. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that some problems transcend borders. Piracy doesn't care about ideology. It only cares about opportunity. And the only way to take that opportunity away is to work together. Of course, international cooperation isn't perfect. Some countries disagree on the rules of engagement. Should pirates be arrested, tried, and imprisoned? Or should they be deterred and released? Where should trials take place? In Somalia, in the arresting country, or in international courts? Legal complications often slowed down the process, and critics argued that releasing pirates only encouraged more attacks. Yet, even with these challenges, the combined presence of so many naval forces made the seas undeniably safer. And it's not just about Somalia. Lessons learned there have been applied elsewhere, in the Gulf of Guinea, in Southeast Asia, and in other piracy-prone regions. Convoys, intelligence sharing, and naval patrols are now part of the global maritime security toolkit. Piracy hasn't vanished, but it has been contained, largely because nations realized that protecting shipping lanes isn't optional, it's survival. For the average cargo ship, sailing under the flag of some distant nation, this global cooperation is invisible. The crew doesn't see the satellite data being analyzed or the legal debates in Brussels, Washington, or Beijing. What they see, sometimes, is a gray warship appearing on the horizon just when the waters feel most threatening. What they hear, maybe, is the voice of a naval officer on the radio, guiding them through a corridor patrolled from the air. For them, that's what international cooperation looks like, a lifeline in the vastness of the ocean. And when you step back, it's extraordinary. For centuries, piracy plagued the seas. Because it was seen as someone else's problem, a nuisance at the edges of empire. But in the 21st century, with the global economy so tightly bound to the flow of goods by sea, piracy became everyone's problem. And for a brief moment in history, nearly every major naval power on Earth agreed on one thing: it had to be stopped. By the mid-2010s, something remarkable had happened. The headlines that once screamed about hijackings in the Gulf of Aden, the dramatic hostage videos, and the soaring insurance costs all began to fade. Piracy, which only a few years earlier had been declared one of the greatest threats to global shipping, was suddenly declining. Not gone, not eradicated, but shrinking from the terrifying peak of 2008 to a shadow of its former scale. And the question everyone asked was, why? What caused one of the most brazen criminal enterprises on the planet to collapse so quickly? The answer isn't a single tactic, but a combination of factors that together made piracy less profitable, less sustainable, and ultimately less attractive. Start with the ships themselves. By 2012, most cargo vessels transiting dangerous waters had adopted layered defenses. Razor wire on every railing, water cannons primed, LRADs mounted. And the effect was immediate. Pirates began to realize that any given ship could have professional armed guards on deck, watching the horizon. The uncertainty alone was a deterrent. Meanwhile, the naval patrols continued. Operation Atlanta, NATO, the U.S. Navy, and the Chinese Navy all maintained a constant presence in the region. It thrived because Somalia itself had no functioning government, no coast guard, and no economy strong enough to provide alternatives. Young men turned to piracy because it was lucrative in a place where almost nothing else was. Ransoms worth millions of dollars flooded into coastal villages, fueling everything from local businesses to warlord politics. Yet over time, international aid and local pressure began to shift the equation. Some communities that once sheltered pirates grew weary of the instability and violence. Somali authorities, supported by outside funding, began to crack down where they could. Piracy stopped being glamorous and started becoming dangerous even on land. By 2017, reported attacks in Somalia had dropped to their lowest levels in decades. The shipping industry breathed a collective sigh of relief. Routes that had once been nightmares became manageable again. Insurance premiums fell, and for the first time in years, crews could sail the Gulf of Aden without constant dread. It seemed like a victory, a story of the world uniting to defeat a modern scourge. But here's the lesson, and it's not a comfortable one. Piracy never truly disappears. It shifts, it adapts, and it waits for opportunity. While Somali piracy declined, new hotspots emerged elsewhere, most notably in the Gulf of Guinea off West Africa. There, pirates targeted tankers and crew with ruthless efficiency, often kidnapping sailors for ransom rather than hijacking entire vessels. Unlike in Somalia, where navies converge from across the globe, West Africa's piracy problem has been harder to contain, in part because it takes place in territorial waters where international intervention is limited. The tactics may differ, but the root causes remain the same: poverty, weak governance, and the lure of fast money. So the decline of Somali piracy wasn't the end of the story, but a chapter that revealed important truths. First, layered defenses work. Ships that make themselves difficult targets are less likely to be attacked successfully. Second, international cooperation matters. Without convoys, patrols, and intelligence sharing, the cost-benefit ratio for pirates might still favor hijacking. Third, solving piracy at sea requires addressing the problems on land. As long as desperate young men see piracy as their best option, the threat will return whenever vigilance fades. And vigilance does fade. Already, some shipping companies have reduced security measures as attacks have declined, calculating that the risk is low enough to save money by cutting corners. Maritime experts warn that this is dangerous. History shows that pirates strike hardest when they sense complacency. The Indian Ocean is vast, and it only takes a handful of successful hijackings to reignite the cycle of fear and ransom. The ocean remembers, even if we forget. For the sailors who lived through the worst years, the decline brings relief, but not erasure. Many still carry the memory of alarms sounding at dawn, of skiffs on the horizon, of nights spent locked inside citadels listening to strangers' footsteps above. Their stories are reminders that piracy isn't just an abstract threat to global trade. It's a deeply human trauma, played out again and again on lonely seas. The decline may mean fewer incidents, but for those who endured them, the scars remain. And maybe that's the final lesson. The fight against piracy is less about winning a war and more about managing a chronic condition. You don't cure it, you contain it. You build defenses, you cooperate, you support fragile states, and you remain vigilant. Because the moment you stop, the pirates return. Not because they're villains out of a storybook, but because they're opportunists responding to gaps in security and cracks in global systems. So yes, the world managed to choke off Somali piracy in less than a decade, a feat that seemed impossible when hijackings were at their peak. But the deeper truth is that the ocean is always full of shadows. Somewhere, someone is already calculating whether the next cargo ship on the horizon is worth the risk. And whether or not that calculation leads to an attack depends entirely on whether we've remembered the lessons of the past or allowed them to sink quietly beneath the waves. When you first hear about piracy at sea, the question seems obvious. Why don't cargo ships just arm themselves? Why not mount machine guns on the deck, give the crew rifles, and turn the ship into a floating fortress? Wouldn't that solve the problem once and for all? It's a question asked endlessly in forums, in news interviews, and even by politicians. And yet the answer, the one chosen by the shipping industry after decades of hard lessons, is almost always no. Cargo ships do not sail with guns. And the reasons why reveal as much about law, economics, and human nature as they do about piracy itself. The first reason is legality. Merchant ships sail across international waters, entering and exiting territorial zones belonging to dozens of different nations. Each of those nations has its own laws about firearms. A rifle that's legal in one country may be banned in another. A machine gun tolerated in the Gulf of Aden would be cause for arrest in a European port. Imagine a ship loaded with heavy weapons docking in Singapore, Rotterdam, or Sydney. The legal nightmare would be immediate. Customs authorities would demand permits, governments would launch inquiries, and suddenly the company that owns the vessel would be fighting lawsuits instead of pirates. Even if the legal hurdles could be cleared, there's the problem of escalation. Guns change the rules of engagement. A pirate with an AK-47 may fire warning shots in the air to intimidate a crew, but if he knows the crew is armed, he's far more likely to shoot to kill. Every encounter becomes a gunfight waiting to happen, with sailors often with little to no combat training caught in the middle. Insurance companies know this. They understand that an armed crew increases the risk of bloodshed, and bloodshed drives up costs. So in many cases, insurers explicitly forbid arming merchant sailors. Survival, after all, isn't just about fending off attackers. It's about avoiding casualties in the first place. Then there's the human factor. A cargo ship's crew signs up to navigate the seas, manage engines, and load and unload containers. They are not soldiers. Expecting them to train with weapons, maintain constant readiness, and make split-second life or death decisions is not only unfair but dangerous. A misfire, a misunderstanding, or even fatigue could lead to tragedy. The ocean is unforgiving enough without adding live gunfire into the mix. And yet, despite all this, people still argue that ships should be armed. After all, isn't a gun the simplest form of deterrent? But the reality is that ships already have deterrent layers of them that work without pulling a trigger. Razor wire, water cannons, LRADs, laser dazzlers, evasive maneuvers, and citadels all serve one purpose: to deny pirates their prize without inviting escalation. And when those aren't enough, the broader safety net of naval patrols and international cooperation fills the gap. The statistics prove the system works. Piracy off Somalia collapsed not because crews turned into soldiers, but because the world built a web of defenses that made the business unprofitable. There's also the matter of scale. Every year, more than 50,000 merchant ships cross the world's oceans, carrying 90% of global trade. Arming each one would mean tens of thousands of floating arsenals moving through ports and territorial waters every single day. The potential for accidents, theft, or misuse would be staggering. A world where every ship is bristling with weapons is not a safer world. It's a far more volatile one. So the shipping industry has embraced a different philosophy, one that seems almost counterintuitive at first glance. Instead of meeting violence with violence, it meets it with patience, preparation, and endurance. Instead of trying to win firefights, it tries to avoid them altogether. The razor wire on a railing, the floodlight piercing the night, the steel door of a citadel, these are not weapons in the traditional sense. They're signals. Signals that say, this ship is not worth the trouble. Go elsewhere. And it works, because piracy is not ideology. It is not a holy war or a political cause. It is business. Pirates attack because it pays. Take away the payoff, make the job harder, riskier, and less likely to succeed, and the business model collapses. That's exactly what happened off Somalia. And that's why, even as piracy evolves in other parts of the world, the same logic holds. The best defense is not to fight, but to deny. There's a deeper lesson here, too, about how the world handles threats. It's tempting to think that firepower is always the answer, that more guns mean more safety. But the oceans tell a different story. They tell us that sometimes the smartest move is restraint. That survival can come not from overpowering your enemy, but from outlasting him. That a crew of unarmed sailors, hiding in a steel room, waiting for help, can achieve victory every bit as meaningful as a naval battle won with missiles and gunfire. For the men and women who sail these vast oceans, this isn't theory, it's lived reality. They know what it's like to spot a skiff on the horizon, to feel the engines surge as the captain orders full speed, to hear the hiss of hoses or the deafening blast of an LRAD. They know the claustrophobic silence of a citadel, the waiting, the fear, and the relief when rescue finally comes. Their stories remind us that piracy is not a game of warships and weapons. It's a battle of endurance, patience, and cleverness. And so the ships keep sailing, without guns, across waters that still carry shadows of danger. They do it because the world depends on them. After all, global trade cannot stop, and because centuries of seafaring have taught one unshakable truth. The ocean doesn't reward those who fight hardest. It rewards those who survive. So now you know the truth. Cargo ships don't survive pirate attacks by matching gunfire with gunfire. They survive with layered defenses, patience, and the support of navies working together across the globe. From sound cannons to citadels, from razor wire to naval convoys, these non-lethal defenses have saved countless sailors and kept global trade moving. Piracy may rise and fall, but the lessons remain. Ships stay safer without guns, because survival at sea isn't about firepower, it's about endurance. If you found this documentary helpful, subscribe for more deep dive explainers on global trade, maritime history, and the hidden systems that keep the world running. And let me know in the comments, which ship defense surprised you the most?